to everyone who's already logged in. We are just giving it a few more seconds. And yes, I think now the time is 5 o'clock, and I think we will begin today's webinar. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will be discussing the current reality at airports. My name is Sarah Proctor, and I am Director here at Copenhagen Optimization, and I will be facilitating today's session. Joining me is our panel with guest speakers from some of the world's leading airports, including Susanna Deza from JFK. We have Neil Ralston from MSP, Azim from London Heathrow, Espen Colin from Copenhagen Airport, and Kasper Havnsgaard from Copenhagen Optimization. The topics we will discuss are focusing on how airports are managing the airport operations during Corona, and we will be diving into several areas, including what are the most significant implications of COVID-19, what are the airports actively doing to plan and prepare for the aftermath of COVID-19, what have the airports done and actively doing to plan and prepare, and what have they done in terms of innovation, and especially if there is anything that they are proud of. Last but not least, many airports have embraced the crisis and turned it into an opportunity, accelerating change, new thinking. We will touch on this and much more. On a practical note, we are more than 200 people attending, which means that we've had to convert this to a webcast, meaning that the audience won't be able to unmute themselves and use their microphones. However, you will have plenty of opportunity to engage, add comments, add questions using the chat function. And in a moment, we will also launch a poll so you can vote to express which topics are most important for you today. A recorded version of this webinar will be available. We will also include takeaways and highlights, and these will be distributed by email in the next coming days. And last, before least, before I introduce today's panelists, I hope you will sit back as the audience and enjoy the session. We are, after all, family of aviation people who unfortunately have seen our industry suffer and being the most impacted industry of all during the COVID pandemic. We're really pleased that more than 70 airports are here today attending, and that you want to participate and be part of this little community of creating better airport planning. So I've brought my own coffee. I encourage you to sit back and enjoy your coffee, and then I'll introduce each of the speakers one by one and we'll get started. So please, Susanna, you are Vice President Operations at JFK, and I know that you have a lot of experience, both hands-on and in the management of airport operations. I'll let you have the word to introduce yourself and say a few words about what's going on at JFK today.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. As you mentioned, I do have over 30 years experience in aviation, both in airlines and as terminal operation management. I currently work with JFK IT, which is a private management company managing one of 6 terminals at JFK. We have a long-term lease with the Airport Authority, JFK of New York and New Jersey, and we manage and operate, Terminal 4. And as you mentioned, COVID has tremendously impacted the aviation industry. We are seeing, very low numbers, although much better than in the beginning of the summer. But it's still difficult, especially for some of us that have been in this industry for so many years, and we've been through so much. And one that stands out is it's definitely 9/11. I think for me and for the rest of the group, the difference is we knew with the previous situations that we were in the middle of that there was an end to it. And although this one, we also know there's an end to it, it's just prolonging for much longer than we anticipated.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll come back to that and dive in. At this time, I'll then introduce Azim. You are Capacity Planning Manager at London Heathrow. You also have a lot of experience and are dedicated to driving results and using our solution today to plan and operate terminals at London Heathrow. Will you say a few words about yourself?
Certainly. So good afternoon, everyone. My name, as Sarah mentioned, Asim Umras, Heathrow Airport Senior Operational Capacity and Planning Manager. I've actually worked at Heathrow Airport for 14 years now in various different roles up and down Heathrow itself. So, you know, security, continuous improvement, and terminal operations, and now culminating in the essential running of the actual airport's operational capacity and plans themselves in terms of allocation and process capacity. So certainly a major impact to us and overall sort of general capacity at airports as a result of COVID-19, bringing forth a number of different operational challenges that we initially didn't foresee, but at this moment in time we are riding through that wave as things progress. So certainly for me, I think some of the key learnings that we've started to see at Heathrow have started transpiring to longer term objectives, which we'll touch on throughout this webinar. But essentially, that's me for now. But overall, end-to-end responsibility for Heathrow from check-in all the way through to stands.
Great, thank you very much, Asim. Thank you for that, and we will also come back to you. Next panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Neil Ralston. Neil is Airport Operations Analysis and Planning Manager at Minneapolis Airport Commission, MAC MSP. Also you, Neil, it's a fantastic, it's an honor to meet you in virtual environment, and you also have many years of experience. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, good day, everybody. Again, Neil Ralston. I'm the Manager of Airport Operations Analysis and Planning here for the Metropolitan Airports Commission, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I'm fairly new in my position. It was just created earlier this year. I started officially in my new role in April, which was a heck of a time to starting a new position at our airport. But nonetheless, it was a position that's important to our management team in restructuring how we do things going forward and how we operate as a business. My new role is to develop a BI-focused data management program, something that we have not had in any sort of consolidated manner or fashion here at the Metropolitan Airports Commission. So I'm also working with our operations team on other related operational planning activities. So perhaps somewhat interesting, the Metropolitan Airports Commission was formed in 1943 to manage a system of airports here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities metropolitan area. Today we own and operate 7 airports, including MSP International, which most folks have heard of, plus 6 general aviation reliever airports that support the smaller general aviation traffic in our area and help to divert that activity away from MSP so that we can preserve our capacity here for commercial and cargo operations. Of course, as an airport authority, we function much like an independent city, but we do manage the 7 airports with a pretty lean between 650 and 700 total employees. 2019 was a banner year here at MSP. We ranked 17th in the United States in terms of airport passenger volume, with over 39 million travelers passing through. That was a record year for us. We're right between Boston Logan at number 16 and our arch nemesis Detroit at number 18. In 2019, we did welcome a slug of new international service to Dublin, to Mexico City, and to Seoul. We do serve as a connecting hub for partners at Delta Airlines and a home base for leisure-focused Sun Country. We got 2020 off to an excellent start. Passenger traffic was running 3 to 4% above our record-setting 2019. And then with the onset of COVID, of course, we all know what happened. Traffic plummeted down to a low point of a loss of 95% of our traffic by April. It's recovered to about 60 to down 60 to 70%. That trend stabilized in early summer and has really continued through today. We were hoping for an outstanding Thanksgiving holiday, but it is frankly muted by some of the dial-back restrictions that have been set in place. So look forward to talking in some more detail about what's been going on here in the bold north of the upper Midwest. So thanks again for the opportunity to participate.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you. And almost last, we have Mr. Esben Colin. You are a Senior Lead of Digitalization Consultant at Copenhagen Airport AS. You've been involved in improving the passenger experience at Copenhagen and optimizing on a lot of initiatives. And I know even with your career, nothing has really resembled the situation that you are in with COVID-19. So please, Esben, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. Yes, I have been in Copenhagen airports for 10 years, so I started right after the financial crisis, which compared to what we see now is just a small bump on the way. Copenhagen has been really severely hit by the corona pandemic. We had 30 million passengers last year, and we've seen numbers as low as a couple of hundred passengers per day during the pandemic in the spring. In the summer, things started to look good. We were back at 20–25% of our normal levels. But since then, the second wave of corona has hit Europe, and now we're actually back below 10% of normal traffic levels in Copenhagen. So on busy days, we would have more than 100,000 passengers normally. We've had numbers down to as low as 6,000 daily passengers within the last couple of weeks here in Copenhagen. So it's a very serious situation in Copenhagen, but we can talk more about that during this discussion.
Great, thank you very much. Last but not least, we have Kasper Havnsgaard. Kasper is co-founder of Copenhagen Optimization, managing partner here, and has a background at Copenhagen Airport previously. Kasper, will you say a few more words about what you're seeing in the industry and about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and hello, everybody. So happy to be on this webinar. I think it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm not in the airports, but I talk to a large number of people in the airports, and can really see the tough times that a lot of the airports are going through with kind of varying travel restrictions, varying furlough schemes for employees being furloughed with government support, and projects kind of being stopped and started and a lot of kind of tough priorities to be made. I think there was one the other day that at least now the light at the end of the tunnel actually seems to be true light and not just another train coming against us. So with the vaccine coming, I do see a kind of a bit of optimism as that will roll out, but I also think that it's going to be a tough next 6 months for everybody. But I think the people we talk to are I think cautiously optimistic about the development. So very excited to talk more on this in the next 45 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think already now, and to those who have just logged in, we've just done the rounds of introductions, and we are just about to throw ourselves into the discussion or the questions and answers session. Again, I encourage all panelists just to simply dive in and jump and comment as you see fit. This is a very down-to-earth session, and we want everyone, including the audience and ourselves, to get as much knowledge sharing and best practice that we possibly can to help each other out of this pandemic. Now, we've run a poll, and I think the voting has been very similar in terms of response. They are all very interesting questions. The one that's kind of leading the way is what opportunities COVID has brought, but I'd actually like to keep that one for a little while, and because it's and see if we can finish on a happy note. But I think Susanna and Neil, I might direct my attention to you two. I mean, you've just gone through Thanksgiving, and I think the traffic in the US is less badly hit than what we're seeing in Europe. What can you say a little bit more about the current initiatives from an operations planning perspective that is taking up most of your time? Perhaps Susanna, you'd like to start?
Sure, and just to give a little bit of background on the traffic at JFK. So in 2019, the airport as a whole did about 59 million passengers. When it comes to Terminal 4, we had about 22 million passengers back in 2019. We're still down about 55% on flight activity and 78% on passenger volume. And yes, although we saw a slightly increase in the domestic activity, especially with the holiday that we just passed, we're still down about 67% in domestic and 85% in international. So it has been a slow start. JFK IT put in place several contingencies in order to encourage, traffic through Terminal 4. Although we are still very restricted with certain states and federal mandates that are in place, and it seems that every state has their own restrictions, which also impede, the traffic, throughout the airports in the U.S. So not just, the federal mandates. But back in April, May, we put together in place work streams that allowed within our organization that allow us to prepare for recovery and restart. The five work streams was health and well-being, which focused on, employees and passengers with temperature check pilots that we put in place in preparation for the event that it will be a mandate in the US. We wanted to be ready for it. Social distance, which focused on queuing, occupancy. We also have a partnership with Copenhagen Optimization and Crowd Vision, which allow us to put in place safe distance pilots that now it's actually in production that allow us to measure the distance between passengers, not just at the checkpoints, but also throughout the queuing, which also has been really good for us to be able to look back and see where our issues are and help the airlines with social distance, which I think it's the most difficult task of all. The other work streams were communication, hygiene and sanitation, and also transactions, which was more on the commercial side for the touchless environment. So there's a few things that we have put in place to change the way we do business. We have also implemented simplified arrival for the international process, which wasn't fully implemented prior to COVID, but now it is. And that also gives the ability for international customs arriving into the US to really truly have a touchless process through facial recognition. The same applies for the departure process, where we have quite a few airlines. We have cameras installed at every gate. So we have quite a few airlines that now use the one-step exit biometrics, which is an integration with DCS system, which allows the customer to board without having to have any interaction with the agent or scanning a boarding card. The goal is that we will speed that program up and have more and more airlines that join it, but ultimately to have a curb to gate and a gate to curb process where we focus on that touchless process. So that's just an example among other things that we have put in place in order to gain the passengers back to terminal, specifically to Terminal 4. But definitely the growth that we've seen over the last couple of weeks is on the domestic side. I also think that restrictions that are in place for New York State and our governor allowing a reduction of quarantine has helped a little bit with the domestic traffic, especially, but nevertheless, we're still far from where we were back in 2019.
Okay, very interesting. And from what I hear, there are some things that are going well, and probably maybe you can touch upon some of the things that have really excelled later on when we talk about all the good things that have come out of the corona situation in terms of new processes and perhaps change management. Neil, would you like to say a few words on the MSP situation at current?
Sure, a lot of the same trends that Susanna mentioned. Again, we had kind of high hopes for a resurgence of Thanksgiving holiday travel, but with kind of a second wave of coronavirus coming through the upper Midwest here, we did see a lot of near-term cancellations. We actually saw booking numbers decrease over for the week prior to Thanksgiving. So, it's kind of playing it day to day in that realm. In terms of some of the things that we did, we operate as a very lean organization, like I said before, 650 to 700 employees. So far, we haven't had to lay anyone off or furlough MAC employees. We have, however, not been filling open positions and been relying on a flexible workforce in terms of temporary job assignments and mobility assignments, which is a silver lining in that to give people that are perhaps interested in learning some new skills or trying something new to have that opportunity on a temporary basis to make sure that the critical needs certainly are being met. Over the late spring and summer, we developed a travel confidently program to really focus on outward-facing, customer-facing protocols on what they could expect when they came to the airport, what our expectations of our passengers were, and what they could expect from us. So I think that's been relatively successful in kind of setting expectations in terms of what people are going to see at the airport and on their airline journey and how they can best prepare for it. Yeah, it's been tough. There's no doubt about it. Our finance department here at the MAC, again, very conservative. We immediately went to a kind of a low revenue scenario for 2021 and to set our budget accordingly. So, yep, it's been tough. Again, we were kind of hoping to start seeing some recovery. The recovery has been pretty stagnant, certainly in domestic and international travel. But we will continue to take it as it comes. I think there's a lot of good things that have come out of COVID. I've heard it said that the root word of crisis means dangerous opportunity. So where do we find those opportunities, even though they may not be quite in the package that we had hoped they would be in?
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I hope we can come back to the opportunity side. But before, let's stay in the tough area, which is, what about you, Espen? What are the most significant implications to your work that have happened in this crisis? I know Copenhagen's been hardly hit by a lot of redundancies. So what have you had to do differently?
Yes, so just on Friday we had the second round of redundancies this fall. So we've reduced costs with the equivalent of more than 800 full-time employees. So that's about 1/3 of the workforce in Copenhagen. And if we started back in spring, we set up a team, just like Susanna mentioned, with the aim of first to close down the airport in the right fashion. So it was sort of a closing team. Then the same team was renamed to the reopening team with all the focus on how can we ensure a safe journey for the passengers. So that's all the sanitization measures, safety, of course, the physical distancing. I was involved myself in a much similar project as Susanna mentioned, trying to repurpose passenger flow sensors into measuring the physical distancing between individual passengers. And it actually turned out to be quite simple to put in some new software and then use the sensors to measure physical distancing instead. And then over the last couple of months, this same team has been renamed again to the closing team again, because just a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we will be closing 40% of our terminal areas for probably the rest of 2021, since we do not see any traffic recovery that would force us to use those areas. So simply to reduce cost on energy and so on, we have closed down these areas. So yes, it is indeed a very tough situation in Copenhagen, and the things I mentioned about the focus on physical distancing, for instance, is something brand new that you wouldn't have anticipated just a year ago, and we also start to look at, well, what would be the long-term implications even if we do have a vaccine coming. I believe that the focus on physical distancing of passengers will still be there. So we may need to update our planning principles, the number of square meters per passengers in flow areas, in queue areas, and process areas. And that will mean an update possibly to the master plan as well in terms of expansion of the airport some years into the future. We have stopped pretty much all construction projects in the airport. There are a few important strategic projects that we have continued. I'll come back to those later on. But we've been forced to pretty much stop everything.
Gosh, yes, thank you very much, Espen. Yeah, it's heartbreaking to hear, but we're familiar. Asim, I understand Heathrow as well has shut down complete terminals to bring costs down. What's the? Can you give us a picture of what is the situation now? And looking into 3 months, are you looking to reopen? Do you think, or?
Yeah, so really, I think the guys have resonated with everything that we're seeing here at Heathrow at this moment in time as well. So really, in terms of actual terminal consolidation, we actually engaged in that activity back in April when we started to see the demand come and drop down to around about almost 90% of Heathrow's baseline had been wiped out quite significantly as a result of COVID-19. So when we started to operate that 10% arrivals and departures schedule, that's where Terminal 3 and Terminal 4 were consolidated, and those airlines were moved predominantly into Terminals 2 and Terminal 5. So since then, some of the opportunities that we took were around essentially demand smoothing, and really resonate with what work the other airports have mentioned as well, which is around, for example, electricity savings. So where we've started to look at the operation and say, okay, well, from, for example, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, if demand starts to drop off, what assets can we start to power down? So baggage systems, for instance, and certain parts of baggage systems like early bag stores, etc., are power hungry assets. So can we start to reduce utilization of those assets? So that's what we started to do pretty quickly to essentially reduce cost and also share some of the benefit with the airlines quite quickly as well. But what we have been really trying to do whilst the baseline has remained low, I think it's really a game of chicken and egg when it comes to capacity balancing, because whilst we're in a consolidated environment, and Esben, I'm sure you'll find this out very soon with a lot of the airline partners who work out in Copenhagen, is really agreeing that capacity threshold, then go ahead and reopen a particular asset or the terminal in this instance. So we ended up doing a lot of analytical work in the background, trying to determine how much capacity we would need, and almost like a monthly rolling basis, which would then say if we achieved 80% of, or we forecasted that in the next 4 weeks, we would achieve 40% of Heathrow's baseline, we would then go ahead and start to reopen terminals. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened as yet. So we've just come out, or we're just coming out of our second national lockdown here in London or in the UK. And since the lockdown was announced, just to give you a flavour, Terminal 5's baseline was running at around about 11%, and that's all the airlines were operating T5, and similar in Terminal 2 as well, where we were operating approximately 15 to 20% of our current baseline. So if you compare that out to the small flurry of hope that we saw in August with demand picking up, where we did see schedules returning to 40 to 45% of their current baseline, unfortunately that then dropped straight down. I think the key bit for us to really look at and observe in all of our forecasts as we move forward are the key impacting variables. So whether that's foreign government checks on at check-in for, or requirements for passengers as they leave or depart from Heathrow. Equally, our own government's arriving legislation as well. So whether passengers from certain destinations have to quarantine, and what that resulting ultimate impact will be. Because albeit demand has been low, believe it or not, terminals such as Terminal 2 at Heathrow, which was accustomed to a busy day of 27,500 passengers, on average, and that would feel quite busy, but we wouldn't really ever experience extensive queuing at check-in in particular. We're now finding that when we hit 10 to 12,000, we start to trigger social distancing activities. We start to now trigger activities such as queue management and all those sorts of bits, which 10,000 before you wouldn't even bat an eyelid and you would say it's not an issue whatsoever. However, with all of these restrictions in play, with the transaction times now starting to move upwards as well, where baseline for summer 19, for example, was 180 seconds or 3 minutes, we're now looking at 5 to 6 minutes. That starts to really chew into your overall processing capacity. So the question about what do the next three months look like, and whether the news of the vaccine has started to stimulate the market itself. I think the market is at this moment in time very much stimulated by holiday seasonality more than anything else, because this is now a period, for example, like similar to August, similar to the arrivals peak in September when you have students coming in, and similar to what we're going to see in December from a Christmas period. People will fly. It's now really our task as airport operators to just keep people safe and ensure that their flow through the airport is smooth and essentially queueless as much as we can make it. So from that perspective, looking at the next 3 months, at the moment still show steady growth. We're currently forecasting about 8% increase in ATMs week on week, which would take us, if we went into March, for example, when we would experience summer schedule change. Just before summer schedule change, I think we're currently forecasting about 45 to 50% of our baseline returning, which again, for us, doesn't really trigger a change in TACT or reopening of Terminal 3 or Terminal 4 at this moment in time. Now, of course, we're hoping that the vaccine will come along and it will, people will be vaccinated quite quickly, and essentially strength and demand will follow behind that as people start to gain confidence in flying out to foreign destinations again, and particularly long haul routes, which have been the most heavily impacted for us. I mean, short haul overall, 63% of our demand at Heathrow at the moment is driven by short haul traffic, whereas before it was close to around about 47-48%. But long haul wise, I think really rebuilding that confidence will only come via very, I guess, almost tactical deployments of the vaccine by governments around the world, and that's where we'll start to see that growth come back into into the market again, and we'll be looking at reopening terminals at that stage. But yeah, has been very much in line with your, I guess, your thinking and your forecasts as well, where you said that you would look at closing 40% potentially for 2021. Again, that's quite possibly a very stark reality, but a scary one as well.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on that, looking just 3 months into the future, I think we gave up on that many months ago. One of the first things we did when we hit this pandemic was that we actually shut down some of our sophisticated forecasting and planning tool, including the tools that we're using from Copenhagen Optimization. Because if you don't have any passengers and you just need to open one security lane, you don't need a sophisticated tool to tell you that. And the same with the check-in. We simply told the handlers, well, you can use as many counters wherever you want because there's plenty. And then in terms of forecasting, we also did initially a forecast trying to look for the rest of 2020, and now we're back in May, June, trying to take into account the drivers, such as when will each of the countries open, when will the travel restrictions disappear country by country. So that was one dimension. And the other dimension obviously was how fast will traffic start to pick up again. And we did 4 scenarios, and there was a very wide range between the lowest scenario and the highest scenario. But it turned out that none of these scenarios were reality. The reality was even worse than the lowest scenario. So we realized that right now we're not looking more than 2 weeks ahead. So every week we will sit together, forecasting team, our route developers, the sales team. What kind of information do we have from the airlines? What do we know in terms of route openings, route closures? What did last week look like? I mean, the best guess for next week is what did this week look like? And then if anyone has any information that they can come up with, we can try and put that into the equation. And even that is not a very accurate forecast. So that's really where we are right now.
If I can jump in there real quick, I had some similar thoughts. Before taking my new position here at MAC, I was the airport planner, position I've had since 2014. And just in 2018, 2019, we started updating our long-term master plan for MSP Airport. And it's just fascinating how quickly things can change, right? Because 18 months ago, we were putting together our forecast scenarios, our 5, 10, and 20-year forecast scenarios. And I mean, we did a range of scenarios, but each one of them was how much growth, right? And we would have been certainly laughed out of the room had we suggested, well, let's run a scenario that shows 50% reduction in traffic, right? But I think going forward, we as a community are going to have to take a much wider range of scenarios and be okay with taking a look at things might not always just be growth and how we're going to accommodate record-setting growth. Now, hopefully those days return, but I think the lesson learned here in our organization, even with the lesson learned of 9/11, was maybe we need to explore not necessarily the facility implications, although to some degree, but the financial implications of an unknown situation that results in many fewer passengers as opposed to how many are we going to be cramming through our facility. So.
Yeah, and if I could also add, so similar to all of you, obviously we only manage one terminal, not an airport, but within our terminal, we did exactly the same thing. We started by shutting down certain areas of the terminal, the concourse makeup units, and we're doing exactly what you're doing. We're looking at the last 2 weeks and what the next 2 weeks are looking like and making a decision, on the commercial side, making a decision on the operational side. But even, our airlines don't have that information. We had such a hard time trying to put together our winter plans, which we usually did months ahead, and we sat with our government agencies and planned for staffing. I think the one benefit for us here in the US too is that, both CBP and TSA really did not have any layoffs. So there's plenty of staff, which has been tremendous help. And our relationship only got stronger with COVID. So everyone is working towards the goal of eliminating lines and having, a continuous flow. And it has really helped us by having their staff there and not many passengers in order to accomplish that. Now, with our staff too, what I would like to add is, so as a management company, we rely a lot on our subcontractors. JFK IT as a company is very small, only a little bit over 100 employees. And although we also had laid offs, what we did was we actually activated our back office teams to work the day-to-day shifts. We had laid off many of our subcontractors, especially on the queue management side. And in order to maintain our staff, we actually activated them for day-to-day shifts. Really difficult decision to make, but I think at the end of the day, everyone was grateful that they still had a job, and it was all hands on deck, and we've been successful, and we're still doing it. And we anticipate, continue doing it at least for the foreseeable future until we have more passengers and we can bring some of those subcontractors back. But it was a really successful implementation that we did, and it's been working out well for us as well.
On the.
Oh, sorry, Asim, go ahead. Or Casper.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Susanna really touched on a massive point there. One of the questions in this webinar was what are some of the differences or changes that we're going to take on from here and move into the future. And one of those changes has been the use of, or actually moving away from seasonal demand planning and going towards what we call demand-driven planning. So, where we would take a week's or 2 weeks worth of schedule forecasted demand, and then start to allocate our capacity in line with that. Because what we have seen a growth in by about 40% in terms of actual efficiency, where we were previously over allocating check-in counters or baggage makeup areas or the security lanes even, and just basing it all on peak week and then rolling that into an entire season. For us was, one of the questions that I asked straight away was why the hell did we always do it that way? It's so inefficient. So that's certainly been one of the key learnings for us, and the team of planners that sit under me who do a brilliant job of allocating all of Heathrow's capacity in general, they've now found themselves in a real rhythm and beat for allocating capacity, having those regular interactions and conversations with all of our stakeholders, whether it be handlers or airlines, to better utilize and use capacity. We've also found that via demand-driven build, it actually increases the efficiency and cost efficiency of the airlines and handlers themselves, because where previously an airline would say, okay, well, if I've got 8 counters allocated during peak, I'm always going to have these 8 counters for the entire season. They would just pay the handler for 8 counters for the entire period. Now they can actually be quite savvy and say, well, okay, I only need to pay my handler for 4 counters here. However, the staff that I now needed, where I had a shortfall at ramp, in the ramp product, for example, I can now reallocate them to ramp and improve that product and service for customers. So I think there's great benefits in moving forward with that as a sort of proposed method for capacity planning for the future for airports.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at a much shorter term window as well as in terms of allocating facility. Of course, we're the prototypical U.S. operator, I guess, in many senses, where the airlines directly use a lot of exclusive use space in our terminal buildings. Not all, but a lot of it. TSA, handling security as a federal agency, but we're seeing some really exciting openings, I guess, in our stakeholders, our airlines, our federal partners, in data sharing. And not to say it's always been completely this way, but so there's been a mindset that's my data, that's your data. We're starting to see a lot more openness and willingness to share. And then us as the airport operator being more the consolidator of that data, to look at that short-term operational picture and maybe get to a point where we can all be looking at the same thing. So we're very excited to be coming on board in 2021 with Copenhagen, with the Better Airports product, and really being able to produce that shorter-term operational look, because it's something we've had in bits and pieces but haven't had all together. So really looking forward to that and finding what data is readily available to use versus what do we have to go out and collect. It's been quite a journey so far. I know a lot of you have well-established data lakes for your information. We're starting off with a data puddle because that's where we're at. We're hoping to be able to have something go splash around in here pretty soon. But definitely an initiative for us going forward is being able to accurately predict within a week to 2 week period, what does it look like and how do we optimize the use of our facility?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah, because we've referred to this as a downtime, but what I'm hearing now from all of you is it may be a downtime in passengers, but it sure is not a downtime in behind the scenes and from the perspective and your desks. Can you say a little bit more about, some of you are using more data than before, some of you are using other planning principles. What has this meant to you and the world that you work in on a daily basis? You've mentioned some good things. What have the challenges been?
I can go first if you like. Yeah, so certainly from a day-to-day basis, I think we've really started to relook at what data we use, how we use it, and actually repurpose it all, because the bit that the time that we never had previously at Heathrow was to really look at operational design. And look at what data we required. So if you looked at this from a end-to-end sort of requirements or process map, you would say, right, okay, what data do I require? How am I going to use it? And actually, what are my key outputs from it? So previously, where you would just use a forecast to tell you how busy a particular day is it an A day at Heathrow today or B day at the airport, etc. We're now actually using that to either do demand-driven build. Now we've started to generate, and actually we realized we had reams of this data, is actually predict the turn up of passengers to the airport, so that we can then better serve their needs. Now start to split that out into percentage of For example, passengers who have restricted mobility or special requirements and needs, what percentage of a particular flight would actually have that, so that we can generate forecasts off the back of that. And also become a lot more intelligent in our systems by generating early bag store forecasts and other details like that, where you're now taking the actual plan itself or the makeup allocation plan that we create in Better Baggage, throwing that out as a CSV and saying, right, okay, well, we know how bags turn up to the airport as well now, because essentially they're with the passenger. So how many of these passengers are going to turn up before this 3-hour window for this particular build window starts, or 2-hour window starts, and then start to, again, just enhance the utilization of our assets, rather than say start everything up at 4 o'clock, please. Now we can say, well, actually, you won't need the use of this particular asset or these particular belts at, until 6 o'clock in the morning, or half of your check-in concourse won't be required till at least 5:30, so don't switch anything on. And all in all, it's great for the environment as well. So I think there's multiple wins there. Just by using data more intelligently, and we have found that harmonizing things like Power BI, or statistical programming, and Python programming, and really bringing all of those tools together so that we can now create demand. Well, we've got something called a Demand Explorer, which enables us to model how variation in load factor will impact us on a particular day. You can actually now do some real-time modeling to then say, oh wow, this takes me above my social distancing threshold. So if load factors did increase by 35% on average in a particular terminal, I've now got to either pull some levers and do something differently, or we've got to have a conversation, or a serious conversation, about public health and reopening the terminal temporarily. So it's been really great to have that downtime during COVID-19, to be able to sit there and really talk to the data owners as well. Sometimes we receive data, we don't get a data dictionary with it, and you're almost guessing what the columns truly mean. But it's been great to be able to sit with the experts and spend a lot of time with them, and really get to understand our data intimately, which we didn't have an opportunity to do in the past. So I'm really pleased about that. And of course, the final bit for us before I hand over has been the endless journey of trying to find the right forecasting methodology for COVID-19. The answer is there isn't one. So whether it's seasonally naive as been spoke about, or it's Tabats or ETS or whatever, we've tried it all, and also tried our hand at machine learning over the last couple of weeks, just to see if that would give us a better view of what next year looks like. But unfortunately, the computer says no at the moment in relation to that. But I'm sure we'll get there, and we'll keep sharing which methodology works best for everyone.
That's all really inspiring. It's an inspiring vision for those of us who are a little just getting started on the journey. Being able to do those sorts of things is, I know it's all hard, but man, that gets me excited. How big is your team there at Heathrow that's crunching the numbers and working on these sorts of initiatives?
So we have a team of 8 people at the moment. So we have a data and systems team who compile everything and put it into Azure and SQL Server, and then they enable us to essentially make that data clean and accessible to us. So we're grateful to them for their services, certainly.
Oh, that's amazing. That's inspiring. Thank you.
No problem.
If I may just add too, so we did stop many projects, but one of the projects that we didn't stop was the CrowdVision Copenhagen Optimization project, which we've been working on for quite some time. And I can't be happier to have it as a tool that has already made a difference in how we organize with airlines, the check-in and also the check-in times, where we now have factual data to share with the airlines, which long-term helps also with social distance. We've also been trying, because the terminal is not full, to utilize multiple or back-to-back check-in counters for queuing purposes, so that passengers are not on top of each other, crunched in one check-in row. So I'm really excited as we move forward with this project and get more and more information out of it. And like I said, it's been a long project that has been in the works for quite some time. And I had this conversation with Esben probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And now to finally see it implemented, it's a great tool, and it gives us visibility, to all of our check-in areas. It gives us visibility to our checkpoint, where regardless of where you are, you don't have to be physically present to actually see what's going on. So it's been very successful, and I'm happy to have it.
If I can add, I also mentioned initially that we stopped a lot of projects, but we have actually kept some of them. And I think what was done in our top management was, when we were looking at where to cut costs, they looked at our strategy. So is this still the same strategy even though we have Corona? And they quickly decided, yes, this is still the strategy. And in fact, 3 of the pillars in our strategy, we need to keep focus on these because they will still be important after the Corona pandemic. And those were, of course, the sustainable transformation of the airport. I mean, the climate crisis doesn't go away because of Corona. And if we want to be competing as an airport also after Corona, we need to take this seriously. So we cannot stop our efforts in that area. And there has come some good news from Copenhagen over the last couple of months, and that has been in this area, one of them, in that we have partnered up with some of the biggest companies in Denmark in the energy sector, in the freight logistic transportation sector, to really propose a way of setting up a full supply chain for sustainable aviation fuels, including wind farms close to Copenhagen, the supply line of the fuels coming to the airport, and how to use it in the airport. And those fuels will not only be used for aviation, but also for the shipping industry and the transport industry. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, we got a grant from the European Union to start a research project along with 14 other partners, universities, other airports, airlines in Europe, to really research in this area. So this is something we're still focusing on, even though we have this pandemic. 2 other pillars of our strategy includes the digitalization of the airport, the use of data, and the third one being finding new revenue streams. Because even before the pandemic, we could see that the traditional way of operating the airport, the traditional revenue streams were under pressure. So actually just a month ago, we launched a collaboration with one of the major IT companies in Denmark to create a brand new airport IT platform. So you could say that over the last many years, we have added a lot of sort of new modules around the core, the AODB. That includes the resource planning, forecasting, and so on. But now we're really focusing on the heart of it, which is still our old AODB system that we will now be replacing with a brand new platform, which will allow us in the future to do even more in terms of data and AI and data sharing and real-time optimization. And we see that actually as a potential new revenue stream, because when we built this system, we not only build it for Copenhagen Airport, we build it as a generic tool that we hope to be able to sell to other airports as well that are in similar situations, where the sort of the core IT platform that everything is built around may be an old legacy system that needs replacement. So that's some very interesting news from Copenhagen, and something that I'm also involved in myself. And if I just to finish off in terms of what are sort of the opportunities that have come out of this, well, one of the obvious ones is that we were quite capacity constrained just before the crisis. It was actually pretty hard for us even just to take out a single strip of taxiway or even the runway, or even a few wide body stands for maintenance. And obviously we've had some opportunity now to revise the maintenance plans and close down several stands or taxiways or even runways for a longer period of time, and do some of that maintenance that would have been required and would have been hard to do in the next coming couple of years.
I'm just going to have to jump in here, because with 7 minutes left, I can already say that I have absolutely failed my role as facilitator, because I have overseen that we have about 20 questions that have come in during this discussion, and I couldn't have cut any of you back, because you've been talking about some very, very valuable and interesting things. But I'm going to have to raise one question, Esben, and also ask them, all of you, in fact. But what is your current view in terms of the peak demand? Because you've all been talking about low passenger volumes, but are you assuming, we have one question here, are you assuming that peak demand will return quicker than the baseline flat traffic? And how are you going to overcome that? Question from Martin van Boxel.
Well, the very short answer is yes. I do personally believe that peak demand will come back before the annual volumes come back. And that has got to do with sort of the way airlines schedule traffic. The most commercially important routes and so will come back first, and they're typically in the peak. If long-haul traffic will come back, we have a long-haul peak with flights to the US and Asia around the same time, so that will probably come back first. And it is something that we need to figure out how to deal with, because we will see that the demand for capacity will be back before the money that will need to support it. Because the money comes from the annual passengers, but the demand is driven by just those peak hour passengers, possibly just for a few weeks during the summer. But since we cannot foresee anything but the next 2 weeks, which is hard enough in its own right, I don't think we have the answer yet to how we will be solving that. But we are obviously revising our master plan, postponing initiatives, but we are looking into the fact that even though traffic might just pick up in 5 years, we still need to do the expansion in just 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a return to some peak levels, primarily at our Terminal 2, which is our terminal that's a bit more leisure focused, where our hometown Sun Country Airlines operates, for example, on Thursdays and Fridays between 6 and 8 a.m. We're seeing some near pre-COVID peaks, and then it just completely falls off. So I absolutely agree. It's going to depend how the airline schedule, and it's probably going to be a bit less regular cadence of returning to the peak activity, but we believe we absolutely will see it, and in fact already are seeing it, but it's sporadic and it's not routine, I would say. Again, needing that shorter term operational planning so we can get ready and make sure that everybody gets through, and then we can redeploy resources when the peak is dissipated.
Yeah, we see the same thing at Terminal 4. We already have our peaks. All the airlines that operate, even if they operate twice a week, they all want to operate the same day and the same time. So it's a new reality, and I agree with Esben. We may not have the passenger volume, but we will be constrained during certain days and times of the day where we'll have to work with the airlines. And because it is a regulated airport, it makes it even more difficult to have airlines change the times that they operate. But we already see that, and we anticipate that we'll see that more and more as more airlines resume operation or add additional flights.
Yeah, and I think, for us, just taking the question to upper level and just looking at the peak periods that we're seeing. So, for example, summer peaks, Easter, etc. I think those peaks will become a lot more elongated than what we're currently anticipating, particularly when demand does start to flood back. And a very pertinent question there as well, because when you start to look at the dynamic of the countries in general with furlough schemes, etc., you've got a lot of annual leave that's not been taken. Employers have been more than happy to push employees' annual leave into next year, almost full complements, etc. So I think we'll start to see peaks almost begin much earlier than what we're used to seeing them. We won't see them with the typical seasonality or trend, and there will also be a longer period of time. So, questions such as around expansion, etc. They're certainly very, very pertinent still, and not something that can be ignored easily.
Great. Listen, the time is 2 minutes to 6, and we're going to have to wrap up here. We all have other engagements I know that we have to go to. So listen, on behalf of Copenhagen Optimization, I'd like to thank the panelists who dedicated an hour of their valuable time to share your thoughts and experience. And I think we've had so much openness and honesty and good best practice. So thank you very much, Neil, Esben, Kasper, Susanna, and Asim, for your time. We do have, as I said, about 20 questions that we didn't get a chance to address. We touched a little bit on some of them I'm going to try and facilitate that we have those answered behind the scenes on email. And that's about it from all of us. Thank you everyone for listening in. We will distribute a recording of this session and also the highlights. And thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.